And welcome to this another incarnation, another episode of the Truth Bombs that I'm trying to get to penetrate the American consciousness of understanding what's happening throughout the country behind the scenes in a myriad of white collar corrupt situations that don't fully penetrate the American, media space because we're all hyper connected to all things Trump and reactions to Trump and how that whole thing is situated. And yet there's so much going on that needs attention, that needs understanding, that I think is part and parcel to the situation that created the mess that we're in. And so in this discussion, we're going to talk to Marc Dann of Dann Law, obviously, as we can see in the background. But I had the great fortune of meeting Marc as a result of producing our work, The Con. And I'd found that after my colleague had assessed at some point that what we were looking at felt like some sort of racketeering influenced corrupt organization scenario as we were piecing all the pieces of the puzzle together. And lo and behold, I'll never forget as long as I live, stumbling into this revelation that, oh, because of this story we had access to, and we just kind of backdoored into it, that Marc Dann, the former Attorney General of Ohio at this time, and his incredible team at Summit County, Ohio, literally put together a RICO conviction of a sizable player in his area and in the region that demonstrated all of the same sort of elements that Wall Street had gotten away with. So I thought it would be a great opportunity, given the fact that it's Monday, February 12th, 2024, right after we're all nursing a hangover from the Super Bowl. But it gives us a great opportunity to just dive right into it. And Marc, why don't you kind of catch us up just in terms of kind of the state of the state, if you don't mind, of what you're looking at and what the world is based on what you've been seeing from the front lines for a long time.
Well, I mean, I just, corporate crime it takes different forms at different times. I mean, we're everything from a case we're prosecuting right now against Dollar General for stealing 10, 20, 30 cents at a time from their customers. They have a corporate business strategy of having shelf prices that are lower than the prices they charge at the register, in part because they don't properly staff their stores, in part because well, they can. And amazingly, we've got cases in Ohio, New York, New Jersey, and Oklahoma. In each of those states, the local weights and measures people have gone in and cited them over and over and over again, for continuing to violate in the random samples they take of the shelf prices versus register prices. They're regularly failing 10 to 30% of the time. 10 to 30% of the items that are checked.
So it's a
But
bait
they
and
come in
switch.
and right, yeah, yeah. And so and the kind of sad irony of that is that Dollar General's now embarked on a campaign to try to crack down on shoplifters in their stores. So if you stick a razor in your pocket and steal it, Dollar General thinks you should go to jail. If you buy a razor that they tell you is $1 and they charge you $1.25 for it, that should be just okay. And that's the world we live in. I mean, it's everywhere. And this is when we talked about the financial crisis and we talked about the lack of consequences, we this whole idea of cheat until you get caught, then strike a deal that doesn't involve any kind of jail time for the executives, is become the model for running businesses in America. Another example today, which is interesting that we're doing this today, because the first prosecution of executives related to the First Energy scandal in Ohio. First Energy has there's kind of two branches to their bribery of government officials. One involves the Speaker of the House, and they bought a bill that we're still paying a subsidy, every ratepayer in Ohio, to subsidize coal plants that are mothballed, including one in Indiana, which I can't for the life of me figure out. Um, and that was in exchange for $60 million of bribes to the Speaker of the House through his various campaign committees. Money that ultimately went to things like fixing the roof on his condo in Florida. I mean, so clear bribery. So the Speaker of the House has been convicted. His 4 or 5 of his associates have now been convicted. The political actors have all been convicted related to that, but still there's still no indictment. And First Energy corporately has pled guilty to that, but no executives have been indicted involved in that bribery. Now, there was a simultaneous effort that they engaged in to bribe a guy who was appointed named Sam Randazzo, who was appointed the Public Utilities Commission chairman in Ohio by giving him $4 million the day before he took office. And he's indicted for that in federal court. Again, the government actors being prosecuted by the Justice Department. But the Justice Department to date hadn't gone after the 2 executives whose text messages are just stunningly clear that they were committing a crime and intended to do so. And I mean, just it's the stuff of teenagers who get caught vandalizing things and videotaping their own conduct. I mean, that's how vivid these text messages are. But amazingly, the Attorney General's office, and I'm not a fan of the current Attorney General, but I got to give him credit for this, using the same vehicle that we used that was detailed in the con for going after a scheme involving mortgage fraud. Created a task force in Summit County, because that's where First Energy is headquartered. And this morning, they announced the indictment of the 2 top executives of First Energy related to the PUC bribing the PUCO chairman. And then state charges were also brought against the PUCO chairman. So I never thought it would happen. I never thought I'd live to see the day. But of course, Patrick, after all of our analysis and all the work you did to kind of open up the door to this, it wasn't the U.S. Justice Department that did it. It was the Verstunken, Ohio Attorney General that ended up doing the work, and the local officers that were gathered together in a organized crime task force, state organized crime task force. So, and by the way, they promised to surrender this morning and didn't show. The continuing reports are that they're talking to their lawyers who know where they're hiding and are going to bring them in tomorrow. So a little drama here today. But I have to say, I mean, I am stunned and surprised and happy that a small step has been made here, because the next guy who heads a public utility, who feels like they're going to be able to bribe public officials to the benefit of their shareholders and not be held accountable in any way, is going to think twice before he does it. And so these are very high profile. Then First Energy used to be on Cleveland Stadium. I mean, they are the biggest utility in the state, and they are they're a huge corporation. And even with all their fancy lawyers, they were unable to avoid being in this situation. So it'll be interesting to see how that plays out, whether there'll be pleas, whether there'll be a trial. I think a trial would be fascinating. But we've said all along, until the guys in the $1,000 suits go to jail, that this is going to go on. And I see that in the work I'm doing as a plaintiff's lawyer, representing consumers.
You've touched on so many points. I hope I can remember all the elements that I want to address. But the first is congratulations, because I have to think in some whether there is a direct connection or not, that in the back recesses of my mind, hopefully somebody in the AG's office was aware of what you were able to accomplish before and got the idea, even though that's their job. But I mean, if you set precedent, maybe that had some influence on. I mean, this is a huge story, Mark.
Yeah, no, I think it is. They followed the exact same path that we did. We clearly seeing that the feds weren't moving on this part of the case. Convened a task force of drawn from multiple departments and did which is the model for the organized crime task force is it's in Ohio. The resources they have are tiny relative to the Justice Department and the FBI. They don't even, they have to borrow police officers to do their work. And so, but look, I mean, this is what it's there for, and they put it to good use. And and to David Yost's credit, who I disagree with about many things, including we were on opposite sides of the recent abortion constitutional amendment here, where he took the side that all of the state statutes prohibiting abortion would be voided by the constitutional amendment when it passed, and then now is taking the position today that they aren't all voided by it. So apparently, the law has somehow changed after the constitutional amendment was put in place. But in this case, this isn't a Republican or a Democratic issue. This is an issue about law and order. And I think those are the kinds of cases that make sense. And look, I know you don't love Trump, and I certainly have no use for Donald Trump, but some of the law and order judges that he appointed have been some of the best judges now we've had in federal court on our consumer protection claims. I mean, you get two kinds of lawyers and judges that are good to help people, to help consumers. Those of us that have a sense of justice and economic and to take on the economic unfairness that people have encountered, and those that think that if you don't punish the bad guys, the good guys will not be able to be successful in their business, and so you owe it to the good behaving companies to hold the bad behaving companies accountable. And I'll take it any way I can get it in the cases that we bring on behalf of consumers. And I think it's a little bit of both. I mean, I don't think you can set aside the fact that every time a utility, now utilities have monopolies, so it's a little bit different. But they do compete with other companies for selling actual electricity. They get a fixed fee for being the provider, or the wires and the delivery system, but and that's regulated by the PUCO who they bought. But they also compete with other providers for the actual generation of electricity, and those providers didn't have the benefit of being able to bribe everybody, and so their ability to offer prices that were competitive with First Energy's suffered from that. In the Dollar General case, if and I don't know whether Family Dollar is doing the same thing down the street, but if Family Dollar's diligent in hiring enough people to make sure that their prices on the shelves and in their advertisements reflect the price that people are being charged at the register, then they're not going to be able to sell their goods for as low a price as the guys who cheat. And so there's an argument here. Even for your mortal enemies in the Trump camp, that this is a law and order issue. This is an economic justice issue, but just as much, it's a law and order issue.
Well, I'm so glad you brought that to my attention, because the first thing I thought of, I was reminded of Senator Chuck Grassley, who again ideologically I'm certainly not aligned with, but I come from a generation that's not too. It's probably in the same vein as yours that we both occupy, just in terms of our history, right? But a belief in the fundamentals of law and order and government's ability to prosecute it. That's why my sort of objective and my mission on the con had become such a passion, because I had known in my head that, wait a second, this doesn't add up. Nothing makes sense. What I'm hearing in media doesn't make sense. What I'm seeing in the real world doesn't make sense until we discovered you and then discovered, oh, wait a second, this is how it's supposed to be done. But to your point about judges that may have been appointed during the Trump administration that do uphold the law, again, that just confirms what I've always thought. It doesn't matter what your ideological bent is. The law is the law. And there's a reason the law exists the way it does. But you identified the thing that has been prevalent in a lot of my conversations with other people, particularly as you know, Bill Black, when he always teaches is that the lowest ROI that a company can make is on political contributions, and which manifests this corruption. And you brought up two things that I want to try to blend into this next part of the dialogue, that the resources issue is such a monumental problem in this country because, as we've seen in the civil fraud trial of Donald Trump in New York, carried out by AG Letitia James, that she has only so much, even though I'm sure the state AG's office of New York has a lot more resources than most state AG's offices. But in comparison to the Department of Justice, not even it's what we're comparing,
it's an infant, it's infinitesimally small in comparison to the
small
resources of the Department of Justice, and
right.
the powers are limited. The criminal powers are New York has more. New York's AG has more criminal powers than most, but they really relate to stock fraud, or I mean, it wouldn't fit the stuff that Trump was involved with. And
right,
most AGs in the country have no criminal authority. Yeah,
right. And I wanted you to blend that, and thank you for mentioning it because I wanted to tee that up in this context, though, because yes, like you said, Ohio state AG, and because you were an AG, you understand this, from an experience perspective that you can convey in a way that most people never hear it from the source, right? And understand the complexities in the political realities, because a lot of state AGs do depend on outside funding and oversized funding, and sometimes if they get in with a company that's got its name on the Cleveland Browns stadium, and it is such a monopoly within the state, you've got to figure that corruption wouldn't be a possibility. But here we are talking about the revolving door, but that's where it goes everywhere. And I wanted to just kind of feed this idea into your next sort of direction you go with the notion of resources, what state AGs are up against, maybe tied into kind of what we're seeing. And I hate to ask a compounded question, but what I'm trying to connect to the American people is that, look, the United States government and its sum total prosecution of Donald Trump and all of the different myriads of 91 indictments in the civil fraud trial and everything else, what we're seeing is there's a lot of, in the electoral schemes, documentation fraud, okay, to steal the election using deceptive acts and practices that the United States government pigeonholed as defrauding the United States, and then had set out to prove, given all of the problems that are existing now in Fani Willis's case because of her relationship, which throws a spoke in the wheel. But we've heard racketeering through all of these forms that I just mentioned, including the criminal fraud exception using attorneys that lie, and potentially in some cases corrupt judges, right? All elements that you saw in the great financial crisis. And we've seen and I've seen over the years, whether the cases you were involved with I'm thinking of the Sackler family, and everything that happened with the opioids, and then all of these other things. What is it going to take to elevate the threat assessment, the threat level, that corporate corruption using the likes of revolving door because of the ROI with their campaign donations that muck up the system? What threat assessment can you kind of ameliorate, can you convey to the American people, in that the remedy is the Department of Justice? Why aren't these two things clicking in a way, given the threats that this country has been facing since the great financial crisis?
Well, because the Department of Justice, which for years was a bastion of, I mean, I've lived long enough now. I'm 62 to remember even as a young lawyer, when the Department of Justice was literally Democrat or Republican administration was beyond reproach. They were they if you were indicted by them, you're going to get your odds are very strong. You're going to get convicted. There were lots of career lawyers who dedicated themselves to doing that. I mean, I saw this in the AG's office. If I had to do all over again, I would have never brought in the political folks, and I would have just kept the folks that have worked there their entire career, doing their job, know their job, doing their job, with without respect to favor or political influence. Those folks have been replaced at the highest levels and then on down with lawyers who want to get their 2 or 3 years of experience in the Justice Department and then move across the street to a tall building law firm, with a $1 million salary to be able to then come back and say, we really, this company is really sorry for what they did. Let's enter into a deferred prosecution agreement and not have any indictments, or the company will plead to a misdemeanor, and the executives will go on their way playing golf and flying around in their jets. It was a little, and the guys who are receiving that request they know that in a year or two they're going to be going to work across the street for these guys, and they're going to want a job there. So the revolving door that burdened a lot of government, but was what really was frowned upon at the U.S. Department of Justice. It's become a political enterprise and entity, and Trump understood that. I mean, he infiltrated that with folks that would use the tools of justice for to advance his political agenda and his agenda of retribution and his agenda to create an insurrection by stealing an election. He wanted to put those folks, and he almost got away with it, because that's how conditioned the Justice Department's become. And of course, the Democrats in there are, good. I'm a Democrat, so I'm our people. Instead of putting in somebody with some balls, they put in Merrick Garland, who is the most cautious guy in the world, and maybe one of the most ethical people in the world, but he's no match for the people that he's supervising, and he's no match for the people that are approaching the people that he's supervising, and he's getting run over by these folks. I mean, what an attorney general who was not looking to return to a tall building law firm could do in 4 years to change the way people do business in this country, to create a level playing field for ethical businesses, and ethical for everything from the manipulation of the stock market to the theft of nickels and dimes from the poorest people in the country at Dollar General, to the poisoning of Americans, poisoning and murdering of Americans with opioids. I mean, which is, there's nobody in America that will dispute that the Sacklers and Purdue, engaged in a certainly, if they didn't commit murder, they were certainly an accessory to murder. But they were, and this was a crime wave that we were up against. It reminds me, actually, Patrick, about the bond rating agencies during the financial crisis in 2008. Those guys made $100,000 a year, and the investment bankers that they're trying to please with their bond ratings, made $1 million a year. And guess what they wanted? They wanted that guy across the table to hire them. You think they're going to be tough on them in rating bonds? If that's the incentive that they have, it makes no sense. This idea that it's everybody for themselves, that it's kind of this personal capitalism gone wild, is it's sad, because when I grew up, and I hope when you grew up, that there were people that really, that they wanted to be in government for the right reasons, to do the right things. I mean, even my Republican colleagues from the state Senate who are left there, who are calling me and saying, these we thought you were nuts. These people are really nuts. We can't deal with them. I can't do anything meaningful because there is a working majority in the Republican Party in the Ohio legislature of elected legislators who are stone cold crazy and are incapable of being reasoned with. And are only as good as the next tweet that they send, or the next story that's going to be in the newspaper. So it's we're in a really, this is not just Donald Trump. Now, there are some who say that if once Donald Trump's gone, there's no heir to lead this movement. But it's the every man for themselves movement. Donald Trump is, if nothing else, he's the poster child for it's all about me. And I'm gonna and so everything I do and measure in my government job is going to be about how I advance myself and my interest, whether it's my financial interest, whether it's my interest in power, and that's the only focus I have. So
And that reminds me of
I
what
don't
I've
know how to
learned.
fix it, Patrick. I think it's worse than last time we talked. So I mean,
Well, okay,
that's
and
my
again,
pessimistic view.
and this is why I wanted to tap this vein, because again, you look, I just you're not aware of it, but I've got to remind you and the viewers that and I am picking up momentum and I am picking up speed, and I'm the guy that's going against the system, because I can assure you everything that you've talked about is also in media. Nobody wants to
Mm-hmm.
tell the story about how the bad guys are getting away and how they're getting away with tons of trillions of dollars because they're getting paid from it. But I happened to tweet last night, and I guess I'm only as good as my tweet, or on X,
Mm-hmm.
or however we use that as an adjective now, or verb. But
Mm-hmm.
the what I said at the end of the Super Bowl was, a message to MAGA. You don't become a champ by cheating, chumps. And I
Mm-hmm.
was like,
Yeah. Yeah.
we just celebrate the Super Bowl. There's no cheating happening right before our eyes. I mean, however you carve that up, and all of the conspiracy and the crazy that, around, people really disparaging somebody as cute and fun and lovable as somebody like Taylor Swift, and in a football champion, a guy Travis Kelce, who nobody handed him anything. I mean, he comes from your great state, and this guy, earned everything.
He comes from my rival high school.
Oh, does he?
So
Yeah.
yeah. So yeah.
But when I grew up, we used to celebrate stuff like that, right? I mean,
Yes. Oh, absolutely. Right.
that's who we call elite. Those who
Well,
act.
and he was not recruited. He was a walk on at
Right,
Cincinnati. I mean, the guy's an American success story. I mean,
right.
he's funny, he's quirky. I mean,
Yeah.
he's interesting. But to each their own. I mean, but respect his self-made success,
Right.
which
But
is
that's my point, though.
what these people say they're for is that, and
So,
yet and
so
yet they're.
these guys, they're almost like hyenas, Mark, right? This whole situation where it's like, celebrate me, right? And I keep saying that Donald Trump is the perfect guy, and I have to thank him on so many levels because of what I described before. But he's just this red carpet revelation of how certain things work. But he's also revealing that in these particular cases, the government is willing to, close the circle on him, close the noose on him, in all of these different methodologies. However, they let Wall Street get away with stuff that affected and impacted tens of millions of people using many of the same types of tactics. And so, to get back to the dilemma and the process and the problem, one of the conversations that I had recently was with Edward Seidel, and he demonstrated and discussed how you and he were suing the fund managers of the Ohio State pension to try to get information that the
Mhm.
state can't let you get the information or won't allow you the information. And so, I think of this revolving door, and I'll just plant the seed from Ohio, and let you just carry this. But I remember finding out after the great financial crisis, actually, it was many years later when I spent so much time in Ohio. But your former governor Kasich was a former employee of Lehman Brothers, for
That's
example,
correct.
and
Right.
everything that could constitute, right? So,
Mhm.
here we are, staring down the barrel of what blew no matter who. And yeah, I am a Democrat in comparison to what we're seeing on the right. But as you know, I've got a little bit more of a, shall we say, a um, Ferdinand Pecora persona non grata to try to get to the American people that no matter what we're looking at here is a continuation of what you're revealing it to us, Mark, on a monumental level. and that there is no time to lose, but to build an independent movement of Americans equipped with the knowledge of how things have just slipped away from us and how this stuff is being orchestrated. So, to your point, what do? We educate and inspire and hopefully motivate tens of millions of Americans with the facts so that if we could come together, obviously, people like you, Marc, who have demonstrated it the whole time. I'm not going to try to become your campaign manager with this statement, but we have talent in this country that would have the balls if they were in the Department of Justice to do exactly as you prescribed. How do we get there?
Boy, I wish I knew. I wish I knew. I mean, uh, everything gets measured. One other thing that happened just recently. I went to the governor when I was AG about we had a criminal or a juvenile justice system here that was the prison system was penal. It was a setup like just like the adult prison system, and there was evidence-based research that showed, particularly in Missouri, that if you put these children who were convicted of crimes, and they're kids who were convicted of horrible crimes in most cases, but if you put them in more residential treatment type facilities, secure and keeping the community safe from them, but providing them with access to resources and to mental health help and to into settings where violence isn't rewarded, like in a prison setting, that they would thrive. And in fact, the fact that we weren't doing that was a violation of the constitutional rights of those convicted. And one of the last things I told the governor before I ended up resigning was I was going to confess judgment on behalf of the state in a lawsuit that was pending. Well, it turns out just this month, Governor DeWine announced that he's going to do exactly what I recommended 15 years ago, which is to make to create those residential treatment facilities. Now, whether he'll be able to pull it off or get anything done in the legislature that doesn't involve advancing somebody's own personal or corporate interest, I don't know, but at least there's some movement towards that. So yeah, I mean, I lived, and I was explaining to my wife, who wasn't around me during the time I was in office, and she goes, well, how could that be? Why wouldn't he listen to you? Well, because it was hard politically to do. And I viewed my office as I've got X number of months that I get to serve, and I'm going to do everything I can during those months. And if I don't get reelected, I at least have taken advantage of the time that I've had here. And everybody around me was like, you can't do that. We got to get reelected. Well, ironically, none of them got reelected because we had a transition, a party shift in the state about that time anyway. And so but that's a mindset that's really hard to break, and that's what it's become. I mean, when you have a majority of congressmen, of people in Congress who would rather who worry more about, or that by making a problem worse benefits them politically, and not having the courage to take action to make it better. We just saw this with the border. We just saw this with the budget. We're going to see it again with the budget pretty soon here. These guys realize that their personal political fortunes are advanced by chaos and not by order. And so they are the chaos caucus, and that's what they're going to do. It happens across the board. It's what's in it for me. It's the what's in it for me of all this stuff. And it's sad because I miss the sense of community, in the sense of joint purpose, and the sense of how we maintain American exceptionalism. And unfortunately, there's just no longer a consensus around that. And so you got a tall order. You got a tough job to do. I hope you get there. Hampered further by the fact that those hedge funds that Ted Sedell and I are suing, they own all the media, or virtually all the local media anyway. And
No,
they're
no, no.
working
They
on
all
own.
the billionaire class and the hedge funds and the asset managers, but particularly the asset managers, because after the great financial crisis, I
Yeah,
discovered that it was
yeah.
BlackRock that managed the emergency funds that came out of the Federal Reserve. So they
Mm,
basically bought the world with the so-called
mm,
full faith and credit of the United States. See, therein lies the
mm,
ultimate rub, because
mhm.
those who know this stuff,
Yeah.
they're just trying to get theirs. That's my theory on Trump. But going back to you
Mm,
and
mm,
the greater the greater good for an American society that obviously had to struggle and overcome many flaws throughout its history to get us into a position that it seems like we're falling monumentally backward at lightning speed, Mark.
mm, mhm.
To your point, let's try to kind of get to a few final points because of what you just brought up with your suit as well. When I learned, for example, that these hedge funds that own the media that are literally uh, uh, referring to pensioners as dumb money, and that the
Mhm.
state will not allow you guys to get inside, the books, what they call trade secrets. And by the way, I
Mhm.
do want to insert this really quick. I found out when we were making the con, when we did the story of course, Dick Bowen, that came
Mhm.
up with the Securities and Exchange Commission vis-a-vis Citibank, who was using trade secrets to do everything I just described about what the government is pursuing Trump on, deceptive acts and practices and defrauding their customers through the stuff that Dick Bowen was a whistleblower about. But they literally claimed trade secrets, which were control fraud. So my question is, when you get this opacity, when you get this corruption, when you get these geniuses that work in these huge high-rise law firms, and we're up against extremely smart people that are incentivized to lie, steal, cheat, and exploit by any means necessary to get theirs. That's the culture that they've created. And so
Mhm.
without accountability, there's absolutely no way to have um, a compelling what's the word I'm looking for? I mean, it's like I keep thinking about, you carry the stick and the big stick and the carrot and all of those types of things. But the incentive is what I'm looking for, because
Yeah.
when people get incentivized or get rewarded for doing this
Mhm.
behavior, how in the world do you stop that? Obviously, by any means necessary. But if you can kind of
Yeah.
just take us home through all of the prescient points,
Yeah.
because I know we can do this. It's just penetrating the masses to understand the message. And you're extremely compelling as far as people I've heard. So let's get the message out. What do we need to hear?
Well, I think, I mean, I just think you need to continue to, we need to look without being paranoid. We need to be talking rationally about these things that we observe. I mean, another adventure that I had with a pension fund in Ohio is there was a fund that the public employees retirement system had, and we filed a public records request for the uh, financial documents that proved the profits that they were showing, because those profits were all retained in the fund, and that would show the fees that the state pension fund paid on behalf of its members every year for that money that was, some of which wasn't even deployed at the time. And we got an admission at the end of the case, that they never provided, even though their contract required it, that this company Glouston, which is an asset manager hedge fund, never provided, nor did the public employees retirement system ever ask for the underlying documents to support the profits that they were claiming. And there's a reason for that, and that is that the fund managers were paid based on the performance of the funds. And so if you own a stock, you can look in the Wall Street Journal and see what it's worth. But if you own a share of the Glouston Ohio Innovation Fund, which is basically a single investor fund, you have to they were just relying on what the guy that sold them the fund said that the profits were, and they had no idea, and they would have no idea until they decided to take their money out to see what was left. And nobody, but they were not even incentivized to ask. And we can't we got to continue to be vigilant. We got to continue to fight. We've got to continue to call, when we know when the brave, the brave people who are willing to stand up to government, and take a chance. The police officers that were willing to serve on the at no additional pay on the organized crime task force that indicted the First Energy executives today. They are here for more than just because they could just put in their time and show up. And if the people who believe that we can have a great country if we just don't we value things other than what's in it for me, if they start to step up, run for offices, even if you lose, it's a it could be a movement that would have some traction at some point in time. Support candidates that are not part of the of the swamp. I mean, the biggest swamp creature of all, of course, turned out to be Trump. In my little world with the CFPB and shilling for payday lenders with the CFPB. I mean, who are big donors to his campaign. So he was the biggest swamp creature of all. But despite what he said, and that's the other thing. If we could find a mechanism with all the technology we have and all the AI to hold people responsible for what they said. And so, even to put subtitles underneath the speech when Trump says, I'm going to drain the swamp, and like, well, on this day, this is what happened, and it's not true. How you get that, how you penetrate people's consciousnness on that stuff, I don't know. Part of it's being funny, part of it's being entertaining, and that's I think you're a documentarian, and that's what I think what you hope to do. You made it an incredibly, I thought, thoughtful and entertaining series that didn't get the distribution that it should have gotten because there wasn't a way to push that content through. But at some point in time, I don't want to leave the country to my kids this way. I mean, now I have grandchildren, so I have a 2-month-old and a 2-year-old, and I don't want them to leave them this legacy. So, I'm determined to keep fighting until I stop breathing, to make this a better place. And I know a lot of people that feel the same way, but they also feel extremely powerless. And so, and it's hard for people to get their mind around that they can be part of the solution. They can do things. I'm on the Charter Review Commission for the city of Lakewood where I live, which is 25,000 people outside of Cleveland. It's our version of here, but it's a separate city, and we have our own charter. And it's going to be restorative for me because the people on the Charter Commission are serving without pay. They love the community, and they want to have a serious discussion about serious things and try to make the place a better place to live. I mean, are we going to be the first city in Ohio that will adopt ranked choice voting? That's what we're talking about tonight. Why not? Right? I mean, somebody's got to start something. What did I don't think it was somebody smarter than me said, the journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step. And so maybe we can get at that. Maybe we can get at there's four council districts. Maybe we can come up with a way to gerrymander them or to organize them that isn't gerrymandering and that isn't prone to the manipulation of the people holding office. Can we come up with some guardrails for something like that in our little city, and then show that we can do it someplace else? So and I think the folks on the other side of some of the issues that we are on, I mean, they're understanding that by running for school boards and running for city council, and but those are the places to get started with this. I mean, that's where things can be fixed, and people of good intentions still aren't going to be blocked out by the corporate power structure.
Well, everything you've just addressed is exactly what we're trying to do. Our objective is what we call the clean new deal, because my hope is that if I can somehow galvanize millions of Americans that are suddenly speaking the same language, then we can elevate people like you who have the ability to actually do this if you're in the system to help, change and tackle and have the balls, because one of the elements that you had just discussed that I think you could close out even more effectively to further the idea is it's what's in it for me, but by any means necessary. And when you
Mm-hmm.
consider all of these things and the opacity and who's doing what, it's like, of course, we're going to wind up with a presidential candidate that's got 71 million supporters that has 91 indictments and doesn't care about anything. I mean, it's just like, it's a cultural, for me, I don't know, degradation. I mean, it just feels like, we're close to failed state. And I know in your state, when you guys experienced the Rust Belt sort of scenario was kind of phase one. And then all of these things, keep coming, the message that I keep trying to build, and I'll bring it full circle and I'll close it right here,
Yeah.
that from our understanding and what we've done, we were able to do the analytics, and I do understand how many trillions of dollars have come out of the Fed to the system over the course of the last 13 years. We're up to $70 trillion, north of 70 trillion. Now, obviously, it's monetary policy. There's different things, emergency lending, much of which I've learned is illegal because of what happened in the great financial crisis that nobody understands. Because we all know that you don't lend to an insolvent institution that got that way through fraud. But if the Department of Justice didn't do the work that you did, nobody knows that they got that way, even though we do know in those deferred prosecutions, they spelled out exactly what these corporations, these banks, these financial lenders, and everybody did. And they said it was guilty, but they're going to do the civil settlement first, and then they could circle back and do criminal charges downstream, which never happened, of course, right? So it was kind of like this smoke and mirror situation. But, look, Marc, you live in a state that has such tenacity and grit, and this sort of, we think about the ethos of the Midwest, and that it is pure Americana, and that's where I hope to see the sort of renaissance begin. Because if we could transition $70 trillion out of corruption into a vibrant, renewable economy that has, for example, honesty, because the attorney general and everybody in the food chain is holding bad guys to account, then obviously the outcome, will never be perfect, but it certainly could be a lot better than it is.
I agree.
And that's all I got to say on that. Hey, listen, Marc, all the best to you.
Thank you for. You froze up there just a little bit.
Yeah, I just want to say thank you for spending the time. I'll circle back. I'm going to continue these series, and we'll try to get the message to everybody we can any way we can. So thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Patrick. I appreciate it. Thanks a lot. Take care.
All the best. We'll talk to you later. Bye.